right, thanks everybody. First, I want to introduce the panel that we've got today of experts. Starting over at the end, Miguel Christofi, VP of Hardware at Aura. Welcome. Garrett Bastable, COO at Whoop. Welcome. And Sri Chennacherry, Head of Operations at Logitech. Welcome. All right, we have a really interesting topic, hopefully all of you are interested in. We're going to be discussing outsourcing today. High volume manufacturing has been outsourcing for decades. There's been a newer trend, not a brand new trend, but a newer trend of outsourcing other parts of the development as well, namely engineering development. This is focused primarily on innovation and accelerating innovation. This discussion tackles that trend, including the pros and cons of just buying the box versus retaining deep expertise in-house. Our panelists have also led strategic initiatives to open their own factories, assemble in the United States, and unite global teams. This should be a lively discussion and debate. All right. So I want to pose a question to all three of you, and I'll start at the end with Miguel. When it comes to outsourcing, whether engineering, design, or manufacturing, what do you see as the biggest benefits companies chase and the biggest risks they underestimate?
I mean, I think building off a different panel, they talked about speed and speed to market. So I think like the biggest benefit that I see, especially when you're starting a business, fresh, first generation product, first generation hardware company is how do I get this to market as quickly as possible, or how do I get to a demo as quickly as possible so that I could raise my next round? So I think that's what everyone's chasing. And that's the benefit that you can get, obviously, by pulling in, whether that's a consultant expert or some kind of domestic company, or working with a partner abroad to try to pull that in. I think the biggest risk, right, is twofold. You're giving up control when you do that. I think we all know that carries a certain level of risk appetite to be able to give up that control. And that means like you're not in the weeds on, you can't answer every single detailed question about why something exists, why that piece of code is there, or frankly, why that feature is there in the beginning. So there's some level of kind of just absolving yourself of that, which takes a lot of risk. And then the second piece is just quality, right? That's a double-edged sword, actually. I think I've had experiences more recently where by being too involved, you can also go in the wrong direction because you don't have necessarily expertise in that specific domain. And so relying on experts, I think appropriately kind of has made a lot of sense. But yeah, I can speak specifically to like a risk example where we were trying to get, at my last company, I was at infamous now AI hardware company called Humane, and very close to launch, we, as a company, decided to make a charge case and do that very quickly. It was like wasn't planned originally, and all of a sudden it was like, we're going to ship with this thing, so get it built and then just kind of go out the door. And we pulled in the EMS at that time to help us with some of the embedded software that's going to be on that device. So I think that was an example. We ended up having to pull that in-house later down the line, a little too late to pull that firmware back in. But we thought at the time, like, oh, this is a section of something that we didn't necessarily have core IP in. It's okay to kind of, hey, have them go work on that. But it turns out with anything that has an integrated user experience, anything that is just like all the different devices are working together, it made sense to own it ourselves. And we learned that lesson super late, and there was a mad scramble to try to like bring that code base back internally and like drum it up ourselves. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Miguel. Garrett, engineering, manufacturing, design, any lines there?
Yeah, so I think I'd echo what Miguel said. Speed, I think and I'll tell quickly one of our own stories about that at my prior company called Density. So speed for sure is a driver of looking outside the company, but I'd also argue, at least from what we witnessed, was the pitch that it could be done less expensively as well. So again, I'm talking about in early days of startup land, probably similar to what you went through, small team, not a ton of funding, and you're trying to find cheat codes, basically. How can I do it faster? How can I do it cheaper? And of course, you want to maintain your quality, but going outside, I think that's what appetizes people to go outside their company, especially when you're smaller. But of course, it's fraught with all sorts of risk. And what I would describe it as is, it's the kind of, if you ever had a candidate that looks good on paper and then in reality you find out that's not totally the case, I think it's similar here. I don't blame these firms, right? They're genuinely trying to be helpful. They have typically very bright, sometimes junior people on staff, and you would look to work with them, and only to find out that in reality, it isn't exactly as you imagined it, and it will never be as you imagined it unless you do it yourself. I'm a strong believer in that, and that's what we experienced. You know, you put a lot of money on the table relative to your size, right? If you're small and you're going through an angel or seed or Series A, that capital is uniquely precious, and then if you're going to use it, I would argue, and we can talk more about this, I would argue that what we found is to be the most successful, especially in the early stage, is actually bringing it in-house, which again is counterintuitive. On paper, that will take you longer, for sure, and cost more, but you'll also have a product that works, and you'll have people who are living, breathing, eating, sleeping it, and only working on your product. And if you go outside, you're almost always, the attention's almost always shared. It's not that there isn't a place for that, and if you have a product or you're working on something that's been done before, slightly tweaked, that's one thing. But if it's novel, I do think ultimately where I would land or recommend is you seriously consider something in-house.
Thanks. Sri?
So when we think about outsourcing, in my mind, there are like two different sets, right? So one is you are outsourcing manufacturing only, which is where you typically go to a contract manufacturer, where you're really looking for either efficiency or you don't want the hassle of managing a manufacturing plant and things like that. Then the second one is about getting more complementary capabilities from an engineering and design standpoint, and sometimes about the capability or an access to technology, which is when you go to a JDM type of a model, right? So now that itself explains, like, you know, what are the kind of benefits of that. Now, one of the things, I've done a lot of work related to outsourcing before I joined Logitech as a consultant. And I always used to say, like, you know, yeah, outsource, you probably get more efficiency. But after joining Logitech, last 9 years, we have our own factory. So I constantly challenge that hypothesis. And actually, you can be efficient even though you have a factory. It's a question of how well you manage that. Now, in terms of challenges or risks, I think what Miguel already talked about, right? Like when you give up control, right? Like, you know, whether it is quality and efficiency and all these kind of, you give up control. But in my mind, there is something that is even more strategic. It is about more of the impact in the market, because when you work with a third party in terms of, you know, in a JDM type of a model, you're also helping them build certain capabilities. Now your competitor also could have access to that, right? So none of them are really exclusive. So it could lead your product to become more and more commoditized if you don't manage that well. That is also the risk that you often need to manage. So what you do yourself versus what you outsource is a key determining factor there.
Great, thanks. Miguel, at Humane, you outsource parts of your engineering team. You touched a little bit on that already. If you could give a little bit more detail as to things that went well and things that went sideways on you. And kind of as a follow-on, how much is too much? And when do you risk giving away your core?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit. I think we gave one example there. I'll give you on the very much so positive side. I think when you're first starting up, it's impossible for you to have subject matter experts in every single domain. And at Humane, we were trying to build not only the AI software piece of this whole thing, but we had a lot of novel hardware. In particular, we had optical modules that we had to develop. We had full wireless stack from LTE to Bluetooth to Wi-Fi. For me to start and some of my colleagues in the hardware space to turn on an entire hardware engineering team overnight is just impossible. And so starting to get subject matter experts, whether they're in optics, whether they're in antenna design, whether they're in wireless RF software stack, just to be able to build a demo so that you have an end-to-end user experience. I think we all still rely on those subject matter experts when you need them. And I think that very targeted use case, especially when you're working with outsourced talent, works really well because it's time boxed, it's very clear, there's a deliverable, it's very tangible, and it's in an expertise area that you may not want to invest in longer term. You may eventually get to that stage, but I think that's when I've seen it work really well. And at Humane, I think we did that really well in the early days, especially. And yeah, I don't know. On the flip side of things, on the core, I think the core disciplines in hardware, at least on the engineering side, I can speak to, and in manufacturing, I think you should probably build out that team as soon as possible. So whether that's your core mechanical engineers, your core electrical engineers, your manufacturing engineers, if you're building a company for longevity, hire good people, keep them at the company, because there is just so much tribal knowledge that comes from that. That will never be documented. It won't be in your drawings. It won't be in any document. And there's just expertise from that. And I think, I think those are key areas I would always try to keep internal, especially in hardware.
Great, thanks. Something you said there, around maybe a previous discussion, Garrett, around upfront definition and how having a really clear definition can lead to more successful outcomes. Can you touch a little bit on that in your experience?
Yeah, sure. So this is, again, talking about a prior experience building a company called Density, and I would even argue a company I went to after called Peak Nano. Both learned or realized, in particular in the case of Density, because we helped start it from scratch, essentially, you need to, if you don't know really exactly what you want to build, the counterintuitive piece here is someone else isn't going to likely figure it out for you, right? If you want to, quote unquote, throw it over the fence to Asia, which, by the way, we did try to do, and I own that because this is 10 plus years ago, lots of lessons learned since, but I came from Apple, and so at Apple, you go to the Foxcons, the Quantas, the Pegatron, Jabil, Fabrinet, Benchmark, all fantastic world-class CMs. So my instinct, despite being small, was let's run a RFQ process, let's get some quotes. And what I underappreciated was that makes a lot of sense when, most importantly, you know exactly what you want to build and how to build it. Could we work with them to develop it? Yes. But some of these folks said, sure, we'll work with you. We need a certain amount of volume, right? And it tends to be quite high. And you need to tell us how to do these pieces of the product. And so I totally agree with what you said. The lesson learned, if I could go back in time, what I would have done differently is bit the bullet on what it took timing-wise to get a in-house team set up and built out, to hire the electrical engineering, the mechanical engineering, the sensor for our product, it required sensor technologies. You mentioned RF. I mean, you need to, if you build that in-house, then you're going to be able to design the product, and then you'd be more able to provide those requirements and I think be more successful. And ironically, by that point, you likely are past Gen 1, and you might now actually know your volumes rather than be swinging for the fences and hope you hit a home run on the first try, which I think time has proven across many examples it just isn't the case. And so if you're not bringing to a major CM clear requirements that you understand and can articulate and volumes, you're probably not ready to be talking to that CM. It's just my take anyway.
Great. Thanks. Actually, for both of you, being ex-Apple, Apple is known, Miguel and Garrett, Apple is known as being a company that outsources quite a bit. Manufacturing, new manufacturing technologies, and leading to some pretty fantastic outcomes. Is Apple the only company that can do that?
I mean, I think to some degree, like Apple's unique in that they've been doing this for such a long time that I think people don't realize they've been around, I don't know, 60 plus years now, right? If you coming up on that, 35. No, yeah, it's 50. Yeah, 1976. Yeah. And what that means to me is like they've developed so many systems to also control privacy and secrecy. I don't think most other startups, and definitely not, even the mid-tier hardware companies have that level of control over their supply base. And even Apple struggles with that, I think, to this day. So, no, I don't think Apple's the only company that can do that. But I think Apple has created an environment with their suppliers, and you can call it trust, but it's unfortunately fear. And I think that enables them to innovate with their suppliers and then control that entire technology. And yeah, we all do it. We all work super hand in hand with our suppliers, and we really trust them, but you're still relinquishing some level of control. But I think that it comes with a huge benefit, which is time to market. And for anyone else to kind of come through and try to copy you, even if they did, they're going to be a little bit behind. So you should be working on the next big thing. So I will say one thing I did learn there is like, don't hold on also so closely to what you did last year. It's probably out of date already. So like now you just have to keep thinking about how you're going to keep moving forward, as opposed to like holding on to like all this thing that you just did for the last generation. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you my take on it. So I worked in operations at Apple for 8 years. And I think what Apple is, from the outside, I understand that it might, if someone hadn't worked inside Apple, they might say, oh, they outsource everything. In reality, we have awesome hardware engineers like Miguel. We have, at Apple, we had, obviously design was core to, I don't even call it modern day Apple anymore, because ever since Steve returned in the 90s, all that was brought in-house. So Apple really had a lot of strength there. I think what we were quote unquote buying or leveraging was really scale that only, at least at that time, and I would argue still today, that Asia can provide, China particularly. So you would be buying just massive scale. The amount of people working on iPhone back in the day was something nuts, like 800,000. I don't even know what it would be today. That's a lot of humans. You're not getting a lot of humans like that in any other place than China, maybe India, maybe there's really not many places you can do that. So I think when it comes to kind of quote unquote outsourcing, they're outsourcing manufacturing at scale and outsourcing supply chain at scale. But I do think, maybe counter to the obvious, there's a lot in-house, like core operational capabilities. We controlled that supply chain super tightly. Even though, of course, the supply chain itself had to work with us, we had the teams and capabilities in-house to own that, manage it, and that model obviously has been quite successful. But I don't know whether you'd asked it or it was something we talked about prior. Can that be replicated? I definitely think Apple's unique, and at the same time, I don't see why it can't be done. I just think it's got to be surgical. It's not a wholesale push everything outside the company, and it's also, I think, unless you're talking very low volumes and kind of a boutique product, you're probably not bringing it all in-house either. It's a blend. It's just a matter of like where on that scale you're sliding it, right? Are you sliding it towards super high volume, and like an Apple-esque scenario, or are you pulling it into lower volume and maybe leaning more internally, even on the early production cycles?
Do you mind if I chime in?
Please do.
So, I did not work for Apple, so but when I look at it from an industry standpoint, I think the level of control that Apple has is sort of a gold standard, right? So it's very high. However, if you think about that from a supplier standpoint or even the peer standpoint, the investment that a supplier makes is easily justified, right? Because Apple itself, the business is so big that they, as Miguel pointed out, if that information is shared or lost, the risk is so big, and whatever investment they made, it is justified, right? Versus when your spend is much smaller, if they actually invest in, let's say, for example, finding efficiency, with that one business alone, they cannot do that. They have to actually share that information across multiple players for them to get the return on investment, right? So that is the other aspect of the challenge, because everybody want to put the same level of control. I don't think everybody can achieve that unless you have that kind of a muscle in terms of the spend.
That's great. Thank you. Garrett, I want to go back to you. You went against the grain a bit by setting up insourced factories in the US before it was really cool. For example, Density Peak Nano, you started that while the direct costs you knew were higher. A lot of the data, though, suggested that that increase in cost got washed away in indirect savings. Can you share more about what you learned?
Yeah, so what you're referring to, and it does tie to what I've already kind of shared, just a baseline. So I've been part of standing up factories in Plano, Texas, 2 in Syracuse, New York, 2 in Cleveland, Ohio, and 1 in, I advised a company, we set up 1 in Troy, New York. So that's a half dozen made in America stories. Prior to my current role, we did this through primarily Density and Peak Nano, post Apple. And in the Density scenario, as I already articulated, we early on said, "Oh, we're going to go to a tier 1 CM." That's because that's the world we came from. And I was humbled that we were not ready for that. But we still were also not ready to do it totally on our own. So we did go to Plano, Texas, worked with a small domestic CM there, and what we were building was an enterprise product. It was at the time, relative to everything else, lower volume, and the complexity was actually not that high. It was certainly not an iPhone complexity. And what we found working with the CM was, as I mentioned earlier, we knew how to do it, so we ended up building it, and we ended up doing a lot of things, I don't want to say for the CM, but at the CM, and we realized really what this particular vendor was providing, and they were wonderful, like I would recommend them, but they, for us, were primarily providing a facility and labor and an SMT line. And so what we said then is, could we do this on our own, truly on our own? And that was when we moved to Syracuse, New York, and we started a factory there, and then we ended up starting our own from complete ground up there. These experiences, to me, proved that the myth, and this is a bit dated, so forgive me, because I think the trend line is obviously changing geopolitically and otherwise now, but what we found, what I experienced was the myth that it's so much more expensive, it's almost prohibitively expensive to do domestically. People forget the cost of shipping teams over to Asia and the difficulty retaining folks when they're on the road 30% of the time. And if it's quite literally in your backyard and you have complete control over it, yes, of course, facilities cost more domestically than they do internationally, but people forget, and this is prior to current administration, we were able to get local and state benefits. We got R&D tax credits. We did all these other things. And I would just encourage folks, I think there's a lot of mature companies in the room, so I'm not saying this is applicable to you. Logitech, these other groups are very large and established. But if you're call it sub 500 people, and your maybe sub series are a hard way to measure, but say you've raised like 100 million or less, I think depending on the product, I think there's a real case to be made to do it domestically. And I saw that in a number of scenarios, including the ones I was directly part of. And it was like, to this day, we're in those locations, right? We're still building in Cleveland, Ohio. We had a lot of pride. We're like flying American flags in these facilities, and these are border on consumer electronic enterprise product, but they're not the like a vehicle manufacturer or something that might traditionally think, okay, due to size and it needs to be here. these are small enough items that you would look at it and you probably would think it was made in China, but we build that today in the United States. And so I just, I think now you need people need less encouragement. I think there's a lot of political pressure and encouragement there, but even a decade ago, the math was surprisingly favorable. Just to give a sense, on a BOM perspective, I found we were really only spending 1 to 2% additional after you net everything out and take into account all the credits. It really wasn't dramatic. Now, again, that was a slightly higher cost, lower volume product. That flips when you go to higher scale. But what we experienced was surprisingly favorable domestically. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Sri, quite a different direction at Logitech. Logitech owned a factory, still owns a factory in China for a long time, which from the outside seems contrarian compared to what most companies do. Use CMs. What advantages did owning your own factory give you, and where did it create problems?
So when most of the matured companies in the technology industry was trying to, going the path of outsourcing, we also did, because ours is a hybrid model, but we did not go all the way. We always retained our own manufacturing. We also use the CM and the JDM model. Now, in my mind, having our own factory gives us a competitive edge because it helps us with the manufacturing know-how of our product and our core technology. It helps us in terms of efficiency, and also when we go and talk to, for example, a JDM or a CM, we know what the real cost is because we have the experience of actually doing it, right? So that is a really big deal. The second thing is, in my mind, when you're really talking about a product, a superior product in the market, it is not always about the design. There is also some aspect of that in terms of the manufacturing innovation and the process innovation that you can bring to the table. So doing our own manufacturing also helps us that. Some of that could be in terms of pure automation. Some of it could be in terms of the final cosmetic aspect of it. How do you? So there is all these kind of things. Now, one last thing, and for me, this is a big learning during the pandemic. Oftentimes, we all think about an outsourcing a manufacturing gives you a lot more resilience and scale. In my experience, what really got us through pandemic was our own factory. Just to give you an idea, Logitech grew almost 70% in a year during pandemic because everybody wanted a webcam to work from home, right? Now, our factory, we lost 1 week of production, completely shut down, and probably another half a week we are running at a 30-40% capacity. Otherwise, we were able to kind of run almost at the capacity, and we were able to almost double the capacity in a very short time frame. Now, the same time when I go to our CMs and JDM, I was actually competing for capability and capacity with other players because everybody needed the same level of capacity, right? So that has really, really helped us during that time. So in my mind, that having that resilience is also having the manufacturing really enables our resilience. Now, of course, this comes with challenges, right? Because once you have a factory, you're pretty much locked in there. The labor cost changes, increases your cost. It doesn't give you the footprint flexibility, right? Especially in the current environment, when there is a lot of tariffs and things coming, you have to rely on outsourced partners to manage that. So those are some of the challenges that we face by having that. So that's why we have a hybrid strategy.
On that strategy, specifically in the data ownership, as you transition stuff internally to externally or make that balance, what control, data ownership are you giving up? And what's non-negotiable for your business?
So I think this transition, so what we did is when some of our products got impacted by tariff in 2018 and after that, we started moving some of the manufacturing, especially that is meant for US, to other places, right? And it was really challenging because one of the most difficult part was like one of the things that Miguel mentioned, the tribal knowledge, right? Many times you don't even realize what you don't know and what is documented versus what is not. So that was a big challenge. But in terms of the data, everything to do with the manufacturing, you have to share the data. The key thing was not to lose any of the high-value IP and the core design knowledge. So that is what we are protecting. And we always try to make sure that we have a clear oversight of these operations, whether it be in terms of the manufacturing processes, quality, and the productivity measures, and all these kind of things. We keep a close watch on that, and we track that.
Thanks. Okay, last two categories I've got for everybody here. Automation and AI. How does the availability and proliferation of new AI tools to do engineering work, failure analysis, process improvements, change the outsourcing equation? Some of this work was previously outsourced, but some would be considered core IP. How do you think about adoption of these new technologies with your own teams? Are there any benefits? Are there big risks? You want to go for it?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a super hot topic, and I'm super curious to learn as well, I think, from others. I think where I've first seen proliferation of AI actually make significant impacts in our daily use cases are in the world of simulations and helping optimize that process. I think when I was at Apple 10 years ago, it was like super manual. And I think to some degree, some of it still is, but it took a really long time to run like a drop simulation. We used to run a lot of drop simulations back then. And so I've seen a pretty strong proliferation of AI tools there, and I think that is hopefully going to democratize that so a design engineer can start to kind of run optimizations again where those fields had kind of diverged to some degree. I don't know if it changes the outsourcing. I do think that those simulation engineers are outsourced often, at least especially for smaller companies. So maybe some of that will come back in. Unfortunately, the licenses are prohibitively expensive. So it'll be interesting if someone disrupts that. But I think on the manufacturing side, I can't really comment, to be honest. I've seen some of the tools like Instrumental, which we used at Humane, have pretty big impact, at least especially during COVID, was a massive inroads for us. Does a tool like Instrumental do full failure analysis for you? No, I mean, it doesn't beat having an engineer hook up a scope to something and actually tell you what's going on. But yeah, I think the jury's out to see what areas kind of get more disrupted. I'm not super sure yet.
So, yeah, I would agree. It is a pretty hot topic. I think, but it's been hottest when it comes to software and how to use it in that regard. And there's aspects of operations and hardware engineering that obviously tap into software tools. But I think the interesting area that honestly needs more attention is other areas of operations and manufacturing, more the bridge between AI as a on the digital side and on the physical side is where I'm pretty interested to see what's going to happen. I maybe it's too ambitious, but it does feel that 2030 feels far away, but it's not that far away, and it also seems that in that period of time where we've come since 2020 to present with AI, I do think we could go that same distance on the physical side, and you might have humanoid robots in factories. Possibly, I would argue that AI, I think, further justifies insourcing. I think you depend less on one of the biggest advantages of going outside, maybe outside the US or outside your own company, which is humans, right? And that democratizes the access to that knowledge and that capability. And you don't need tens of thousands of electrical engineers to build something anymore. AI can help with that, but then on the robotics side, obviously production lines for many, many years have been automated. I do wonder and hope it's going in a direction where the repetitive processes that aren't ready for line automation might be satisfied by what I would describe as humanoid robots, or I think Elon would call it Optimus Prime, but something that can behave and act like a human, have the dexterity of a human, can move nimbly around a facility, and take on some of these tasks like setting up pallets and all these other aspects. But the bridge to that, I believe, is a greater focus on how AI can help operations and hardware. I think AI has dramatically assisted in software, and there's a ton of tools, Cursor and Replit and all these other tools out there that are suited for that. And it makes sense. That's the low-hanging fruit. I think the bigger challenge is going to be what do we do to bridge till we actually have really capable humanoid robots building complex physical goods. And I think there's a lot more opportunity. I would also touch on, we use Instrumental, and find a lot of value there, and we find value in other tools. We use Parabola and these other things. There's a lot of things on the market, but I'm most excited about, again, the for lack of a better description, the humanoid robot aspect of it, and what that's likely going to do to dramatically reshape manufacturing. And again, probably further us towards domestic manufacturing.
I think the two things in my mind, right? Like, generally when you talk about any sort of outsourcing, right, the first place to start with like a core versus the context, right? Now, there is some parallels here with respect to AI also. Like, you wanted to first take instead of outsourcing the context, now AI the context, right? So that is one. And the second, I completely agree with what Garrett just said, right? Because even when you think about an automated manufacturing, so a lot of our mice is made on an automated line. That automated line can make only that one specific type of mice, nothing else, right? Now, in a world of humanoids, we could have an automated line that makes a Logitech mice and a Whoop tracker and maybe even a Tesla car, right? So imagine that kind of a scenario in which the whole outsourcing concept and the value of outsourcing will change significantly. Now, I don't know which way it'll move. The whole power here or the capability here could move towards more in-house, where I can buy this automated line and I can make whatever products. Or it could also be the power lies with the companies that make these automation lines. Now the contract manufacturer doesn't bring much value, right? So I don't know which way, how it is going to evolve, but it is definitely going to change.
Thanks very much. Wrapping up, you can choose which of these to answer. The first, is there any particular super painful experience in outsourcing you've had that throughout your career that you would want to share as a do not tread here example? Or the members of the audience here, if they're considering whether or not to outsource a piece of engineering or manufacturing, what's the one question they should ask themselves before making that call? We'll start back with you, Miguel. Choose your poison.
I always have to go first. I guess I already gave a horror story to some degree. It wasn't specifically intense, but I guess like the main question I would ask, like whether you're an engineering leader or founder of a company, like you really got to think longer term. I mean, that's your job, is like, hey, how am I going to get to the next milestone? But also like, how am I going to plan for longevity? So, are you as a leader going to be so-called upset if whatever that discipline or that knowledge is just completely disappears and you don't have that? So I think it's just be something to be mindful of is how much do you want to invest in that particular experience or expertise, and how much do you want to refer back to that in the future? And then I think the other thing that I like to say is like, you have to redefine yourself as a company. Like, I think a lot of these companies are not hardware companies, they're services companies. And if you look at autonomous vehicles, like what is the product exactly, and what is, you're constantly defining what is core technology and what isn't core technology, and you're having that debate with yourself. And I think it is good to be really crystal clear about what you are and what you aren't. And I think there's a lot of successful businesses that ship hardware but are not hardware companies, and inherently may not find that much value in the manufacturing expertise required for whatever that thing is. And they're massively successful. And I won't name them here, but there's definitely several that have launched in the last like 7 or 8 years that are more, focused on the value that they're delivering from that hardware, but the hardware is really just commoditized. And so that's just an equation you need to calculate. You don't need a fully staffed hardware engineering team if that's your business model, like is kind of my argument.
So I'd say, we again talked a little bit about this, but the experience just, it's one of them, when you go through something so painful, you just don't forget it. And essentially it is convincing yourself that it's going to take you longer and cost you more to do something. In the end, I think what we found is that it's that back to my earlier statement about it looks good on paper, and then in reality, I think we ended up, so Series A at the time, we probably spent almost a third of what we raised attempting to do stuff outside the company, and you'd think you'd learn the lesson once, but we were convinced we could find a way to do it more affordably and faster, not in-house. And it wasn't until we fully appreciated what you can do in-house. So I think you asked the question to ask what I mean, I guess I'm doing both here. I'm taking both questions. The story, the scary story is, your early capital particularly is very precious. I mean, any capital is precious, but early especially. And I think you're taking a bigger risk when you attempt to do something outside your walls than you are inside. It's counterintuitive. It feels risky. How can I hire this great talent? How can I build this team? I'm not even sure how to do all these things. I find that in the end proved to be not once, but many times in my career to be more successful than attempting to push it outside. The questions I'd ask, the easiest one, the simplest one is, do I have enough volume? And again, I at one point lied to myself and said, oh, we're gonna be selling 6 figures of this thing a year. The reality is it's very hard to go from 0 to over 100,000 in a short period of time. I almost don't care what it is shy of a rubber ducky, right? Like, you're just not gonna build that at that scale. And I think you need to be humble enough to say, we're gonna work our way there. So that's really one of the core questions I'd ask. First and foremost is what is the volume? That's the easy one. The more difficult one is, do I have enough faith in my team and myself to figure this out, rather than depend on a third party to figure it out? You might get lucky, and in actually a number of cases, the third party does figure it out, can figure it out. And I think that's most of the time occurs when it's a known product. But if you're doing something novel, you're out getting patents for it, you probably should just double down on that and hire the people you need in-house, at least the core team, at least a couple of every discipline, and basically bet on yourself, right? It's a tough bet, and it's far less known. You can look at those that have done it before and say, oh, we're just going to be yet another one that's successful with you. It's actually not as easy as that may seem, and it's also definitely not as cheap as that may seem. So it looks good on the surface. In reality, what I've advised companies I work with to do is to invest in yourself and your team, make that bet, and I've actually only ever seen good results from it. I'm sure there are examples of where that falls short, but I've been even been surprised myself that the advice to do it in-house has worked out as well as it has. So that's what I'd encourage anyone who's considering that to think about.
So I guess anybody who is thinking about the decision, as we all would expect, make sure that you know why you're doing this. It is really strategic for you. You are looking at all the trade-offs. You are also thinking about how you're going to manage it. Oftentimes people underestimate the level of effort and the oversight required even in an outsourced environment. But in my experience, the piece that people oftentimes tend to undermine is the partner aspect of it. When you think about the contract manufacturer, they all may look the same, but they are not the same, right? In terms of the strategy, how the culture, how they are structured, they are very, very different. Oftentimes, I burn my hands by going to the wrong partner, right? Like, for example, even very recently, I had like 2 big products. I said like, okay, this partner is perfect for me. I gave it to them, but later only I realized that there are 2 different business units who are going to touch my product. What that means is for each one of them, it is a small business. Combined, it is still big, but individually, this is not big enough for them to pay any attention, right? If I knew, if I had done my due diligence, I would have looked at the structure. I probably would have said like, that's not where I want to be. So I wouldn't discount that at all. Please make sure that you're looking for the right partner.
That's great. Great to end on. Thank you, Sri. Garrett, Miguel, I want to give a big round of applause for our panel today. Thank you all so much.